The biggest surprise, future star, best newcomer, and a whole lot more from Notre Dame Spring Practice is coming right up.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Tuesday, April 23rd, and thank you for making this your first listen of the day. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I'm your host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. And as a reminder, you can watch the show on YouTube, or you can listen wherever you get your podcasts. Please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're watching along on YouTube, or if you're listening to the pod, please rate the show 5 stars, leave a review, and subscribe there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, let's get into it. I'm taping this pretty late on Monday night, and I just finished watching the end of the Nuggets-Lakers game. That was an absolutely insane finish. So I've got a bunch of energy right now, so I'm going to try to all dial it into today's show. And now that spring practice is officially over for Notre Dame, it's time to announce my spring practice superlatives. I actually did this segment at the very beginning of March, right before spring ball was about to start, as a way of previewing the upcoming month of practices and the blue-gold game. But I was really just making educated predictions based on how I thought things would play out. But now that it's over, I've had the chance to evaluate everything. I'm actually going to hand out my real superlatives in today's show. So let's get to the first one, and that is the most likely to break out in 2024. Before spring practice, I thought it'd be running back Jadarian Price. And for the most part, he had a really solid spring. He was unable to participate in the blue and gold game while he nursed a hamstring injury that he suffered the week before. So instead of Price, I'm going to give it to wide receiver Jaden Greathouse. This was a tough choice. There were a lot of good options. But when you look at the receiver room, they have so much more talent than they've had in a really long time. And Mike Brown, the new wide receivers coach, is going to be able to rotate at least 7 guys. He said he wants to have a 6-man rotation. I think it's going to end up being more than that because odds are guys are going to get hurt and more guys are going to rotate in. That's just the way that things work at the wide receiver position, especially when you have Mike Denbrock saying that he wants to run a lot more 11 personnel and having three wide receivers on the field at one time. So throughout spring practice, as much talk as there's been about the wide receiver room, the one receiver whose name came up the most was Jaden Greathouse. He did have a quiet spring game. He only had 3 catches for 38 yards. It wasn't nearly as like eye-popping as what he did last year in his first blue gold game when I think he had 11 catches. He led the team with that, and he caught a bunch of balls from Sam Hartman, and it's sort of when the hype train about Jaden Greathouse started, and then it kicked into overdrive in that season opener against Navy when he had 2 touchdowns in his first ever collegiate game. So even though he had a quiet spring game, on a day-to-day basis, Jaden Greathouse was just one of those guys who are like, man, he's just winning a lot. He's going up against the best corner that's out there. He's winning a lot of reps. The quarterbacks trust him. And you actually saw that at the end of the blue and gold game because when the game was on the line for the blue team, they needed a first down. It was 4th and short. If they got the first down, the game was over. If they didn't get it, then the gold team would have a chance to score and tie up the game. Who did Mike Denbrock call a play for? It was Jaden Greathouse. Greathouse made a nice contested catch across the middle for the first down and sealed the game for the blue team. I know it was just one catch at the end of the game, but to me, I think that says a lot about the coaching staff's trust in Greathouse and really the quarterback's trust in Greathouse as well. I just think he is that just solid as a wide receiver, and I think that he is definitely the favorite to lead the team in receptions this season. I would certainly bet on it. If you look at what he did last year, he finished with 18 catches, 265 yards, and 5 touchdowns in really just 8 games played because he missed several games with a hamstring injury last year. If he's able to stay healthy throughout this year, I think he's going to put up big numbers. And I know that Notre Dame has a lot of other options at wide receiver, but I just think that when Notre Dame needs a play to be made, they're going to trust Jaden Greathouse to go out there and make that play. And he can do so many different things. He's very versatile. He can line up anywhere on the field. He can play in the slot. He can play in the field. If they really needed him to play boundary, I think he could do that and do pretty well there. So I think he is going to be wide receiver 1 on this team, and I feel really confident about my pick that he's going to be the breakout star, even though I considered several other guys, including Jeremiah Love, Jalen Sneed, Bubakar Traore, even Christian Gray. They all had a case to be made, but I feel like Greathouse is the safest option given what he's already accomplished. Okay, Next superlative goes to the best newcomer. So this could be early freshman or transfers. Before spring, I picked R.J. Oben, the transfer from Duke. I thought he'd really play well in the spring practice, and it's not that he didn't play well. It's just that he had a pretty quiet spring ball overall. He did have that really nice sack and a forced fumble in the blue gold game when he just straight up cooked Charles Jagasaw in the last play of the first half. And I still feel good about Oben, but he didn't have quite the spring practice that some other guys had, including linebacker Kingston Viliamu-Asa, and that is who I am giving the best newcomer award to. He has turned heads all spring long. He came in with incredibly high expectations, and he has somehow managed to exceed them in a short amount of time that he's been on the practice field for Notre Dame. And we got to see a little bit of that in the spring game. He was making plays all over the field in coverage, blitzing the quarterback, also making plays in the run game. And I think what sets apart KVA compared to everyone else is his ability to pick up the defense. For a freshman Mike linebacker, no less, to be able to handle everything that Al Golden and Max Bull are throwing at him, to be able to understand it, digest it, and then make plays on the field, and he knew where to be. That's really, really difficult, but he makes it look easy. So then you take his incredible football IQ, and then you add in the fact that he has all these natural abilities. He's a really, really, really good football player. The future is so bright for KVA, and I always thought that he'd have a role this season. I didn't really know what that was going to be. I didn't know if it was going to be like, hey, he'd probably get like 10 to 15 snaps a game. I think it's going to be a little bit more than that, even though I really like Drake Bowen. I just think that Max Bulla and Al Golden are going to rotate the linebackers a lot more than they have in years past, because in the past couple of years, J.D. Bertrand and Maris Leofau were so far ahead of all the other linebackers on the roster, and I still feel that Jack Kaiser is ahead of everyone else, but there are so many young guys like KVA, like Drake Bowen, like Jalen Snead, Jaden Osbury, who all have a right to be out there on the field and can do different things for you. They're all going to have a chance to make some plays, and I think KVA is definitely going to have a larger role than I expected going into spring practice. So he is the best newcomer for me. It could have been CJ Carr, Mikey Gilbert, maybe even Chris Mitchell, the transfer from Florida International. They're all quality options for the superlative, but I think that KVA impressed the most, starting with day one all the way through spring practice, and I think he's going to have the biggest impact on the field this season out of any of the other guys I just mentioned. Okay, next one, the most curious award. I picked Riley Leonard before spring, and I'm sticking with it. As a matter of fact, I think I might have gotten this. He's actually more curious than I thought he would be going into spring, because when I first picked him, I figured we would see flashes from him in spring practice, and there would be some signs that like, oh yeah, Riley Leonard is this incredible athlete. He's a chance to be really good at Notre Dame, but then there'd also be moments where he'd be a little bit inconsistent. His accuracy issues would show up, but unfortunately for us, we didn't really get to see any of that because Riley Leonard barely participated in spring practice. He suffered a stress fracture. I don't know if that's the correct medical term. Do you suffer a stress fracture? Either way, he had to have surgery on a stress fracture, his second surgery of the calendar year, so he was not really a participant in much of spring practice. So we still don't know a lot about what Riley Leonard can do as the starting quarterback at Notre Dame. I know what he did at Duke. I know he's a great athlete, but I still have a lot of questions about how good he can be for this Notre Dame team this season in a new offense surrounded by wide receivers who he really hasn't had a ton of time to throw to, and an offensive line that he really just hasn't had the opportunity to practice with. Those are all concerns that I have about Riley Leonard, and I still think he's a really good player, and he's going to make some great plays for Notre Dame this season, but I have more questions about him now than I did before spring practice, and that is frankly not a great place to be. That's not saying that he can't end up having a really good season for Notre Dame. It's just that there's going to be a lot of questions lingering around Riley Leonard throughout the summer, and his health is going to be something that's monitored constantly throughout summer workouts and into fall camp, because Notre Dame needs him healthy going into College Station in that first game of the season. And even though I feel really good about the backup options, and I feel like you can trust a guy like Steve Angeli to go out there and win you a game, considering the fact that Notre Dame plays one of their toughest games of the season in the season opener on the road in a really hostile environment makes me a little bit nervous about that. So I really hope Riley Leonard is healthy and he's able to get a lot of reps with the wide receivers and the offensive line this summer, because Notre Dame really needs Riley Leonard to be great this season in order for the team to be great overall. I also thought Kenny Minchey was a good option for this award, because I'm just very curious to see what Minchey decides to do this offseason, considering he's in a weird spot on the quarterback depth chart right now. He's the third guy, but you've got C.J. Carr, the true freshman, right there behind him, who's really competing because he had a great spring practice. And then you've got Steve Angeli, who's a year older than Kenny Minchey, who looks like he's going to be around at Notre Dame. So I don't really know where that leaves Kenny Minchey. I think he's a really, really good player. I talked about him a lot in yesterday's episode. I thought he had one of the best days of any player in the blue and gold game, and I think his future is really bright. I just don't know where it's going to be because the Notre Dame quarterback room is so crowded. Okay, I've got several more superlatives to hand out, including one for a player who I believe solidified himself as a future star this spring. That's coming up next. This episode is sponsored by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150. Win or lose, you can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Okay, I thought a lot about this next superlative. It is the future star. Before spring practice, I picked quarterback Christian Gray. I still think he can be a future star, but he wasn't the talk of spring practice quite like the player who I'm actually going to give this to was. That would be early enrollee freshman quarterback C.J. Carr. And look, I know I shouldn't overreact, but remember what Rudy's friend Pete said in the movie? Having dreams is what makes life tolerable. Well, I'm already dreaming of the day that C.J. Carr leads this team back to a national championship. And look, I'm partially kidding about this, but considering how much excitement there's been about C.J. Carr since the moment he committed to Notre Dame, and then you take into the fact that he absolutely delivered on all of that promise in everything that we were able to see in spring practice, it's like impossible to not get really excited about what the future looks like for C.J. Carr and the offense surrounding C.J. Carr, because he just seems to have it. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, C.J. Carr seems to have it, and he's already showing it at such a young age. And really, the hype started to really build with the Jersey scrimmage on the Saturday before the blue and gold game when C.J. Carr was the best quarterback on the field. And yes, I understand that C.J. Carr was playing with the 2s and 3s, and he was playing against the 2s and 3s on defense, but then he came out in the blue and gold game, and he followed up that performance in the Jersey scrimmage with another really solid outing, playing for both the blue team and the gold team. He finished with a combined 15 of 23 passing, 165 passing yards, a beautiful pass for a touchdown to Micah Gilbert, which I believe was the best pass of the entire day, and then another day with 0 interceptions. And I think when you just look at what he can do in the pocket, what he can do when he's rolling out to his right and his left, and his ability as a runner if he needs to scramble, like he's got it all. And mechanically, he's already so sound. It's really impressive for a freshman quarterback because, look, Notre Dame has missed on a lot of highly touted prospects coming out of high school, or specifically quarterback prospects coming out of high school and then going into Notre Dame. But with a lot of those prospects like Tyler Buckner, Phil Dracovic, the first time you saw him throw the ball, whether it be in the spring game or whatever, it was like, oh, that looks a little bit weird. Brandon Wimbush can be included in this as well because he was really highly touted coming out of high school. None of them ever looked as good as C.J. Carr has looked in his first spring practice. And again, I understand if you're like, hey, it's just one spring practice, you're overreacting, he's going up against the backups. Like, those are fair concerns, but all you have to do is just watch C.J. Carr. Watch his mechanics. Watch the way that the ball comes out of his hand. It is different compared to all the other quarterbacks. And maybe when Riley Leonard comes back, he's going to have that same sort of pop when the ball comes out of his hands. But right now, C.J. Carr just has a different level of arm talent. And it's not just one thing to have that arm talent. He has everything else that you would want to have in a quarterback, and he's already showing it at such a young age. So I think the future is really bright for him. I am so excited about what he can do. And if you've been following this podcast for a long time, you know that I've always been a little bit hesitant to crown C.J. Carr early, even when he was a recruit and he was like talked about and praised by a bunch of different people, and they were like, CJ Carr is like a can't miss guy. I've always said a lot of the 5-star or even the high 4-star quarterbacks, like they bust at the same rate in college as college quarterbacks do in the NFL draft. It happens a lot, and I guess it still could happen with CJ Carr, but based on what we have seen so far, I feel confident in saying that one day he is going to be a star, he's going to be a leader of this program, and it might happen even sooner than I thought it would be when he committed. So very, very impressed by CJ Carr. Another guy I've been very impressed by, linebacker Jalen Sneed. He wins the late bloomer superlative. And before spring practice, I picked Jason Anye because I thought he would take a big step while Gabriel Rubio was absent. And I thought Anye had a good spring, nothing crazy. And I might be cooking the books here a little bit by calling Jalen Sneed a late bloomer because he is still a sophomore academically, and he's going to be a redshirt sophomore in terms of eligibility playing football next season. But I think that the buzz around him all camp has been incredibly exciting. And this is his third spring practice. He was an early enrollee freshman, so he's been around for a while, and it kind of felt like now or never with Jalen Sneed going into the spring practice. Like if he didn't put it all together this spring and it looked like he was going to be a gadget player again, then he'd probably be a top candidate to hit the transfer portal and go somewhere else. But that is not the case. By all accounts, Jalen Sneed is really putting his game all together. He's becoming a complete linebacker and not just a pass rushing asset. He can really do it all now. And it's great because we always knew he had that elite athleticism. It's a reason why he was a 5-star coming out of high school. It's a reason why he was the highest ranked prospect in Notre Dame's class that year. But now that he's doing the little things right, he knows where he needs to be. He's not just blowing by ball carriers. He's taking the right angle, and he's not getting burnt. It's really, really exciting to think about what he can do for this Notre Dame defense because, yes, he's still going to be at his best when he's just blitzing off the edge, and he's just got an incredible first step that can get by even the biggest, baddest tackles. But now that he can do the little things right, I'm just really excited. And it did take a little bit. Like, more often than not, if you're a 5-star linebacker coming out of high school, you're probably showing why you were ranked that high early on in your career. Even if it's not your freshman year, you're probably going to see it as a sophomore. That really hasn't been the case for Jalen Sneed. He had a couple big plays last season. He had that big sack forced fumble on Caleb Williams in the USC game. He had a huge deflection on 4th and goal against Ohio State. But when you look at his season as a whole, he really wasn't that much of a factor. But I think that's going to change significantly now that he's going into his 3rd year in the program. I think that he can really take off this season. So he is my late bloomer. He kind of reminds me of Chase Claypool to a lesser extent because it seems like the light bulb went off for Sneed, much like it did for Claypool after a couple of years. Claypool had a ton of raw talent, but he wasn't really ready to be that guy early on in his career because he wasn't mature enough yet. And Sneed has actually been pretty transparent about that he really wasn't as mature as he should have been when he started. But now it seems like he's figured out. He's got his head in the right place, and he's ready to take his game to the next level. So he is my late bloomer. Okay, next one. The most electric superlative. I'm giving this to running back Jeremiah Love. I picked wide receiver Chris Mitchell, the transfer from Florida International before spring, and he actually still has a case to win this superlative. He had the game-winning touchdown in the blue and gold game where he just hit a double move on poor Isaiah Dunn, made him fall down. That's going to be a tough film session for Isaiah Dunn. But you got to see his speed, and you've heard Marcus Freeman say on multiple occasions now that Chris Mitchell has had a really solid spring practice and that everything that they thought about him when they added him in the portal has been validated based on what he's been able to do on the practice field. So I still really like Chris Mitchell, but Jeremiah Love is just different, man. Like, he just looks different out there compared to everyone else, especially when he has the ball in his hands. I think he had the play of the game in the spring game when he took a little check down and took it 32 yards, made like 3 guys miss, dragged a few defenders. Like, it's kind of like the Shaq meme where he was like, I'm sorry, I was unfamiliar with your game. It's not that I was unfamiliar with Jeremiah Love and didn't think he could be a really good player, but I always thought of him more as like a speed guy, sort of a package guy, maybe like a jet sweep, like maybe like a bigger Chris Tyree in terms of height, but he is much more than that. He runs way harder than I thought he would, and that was a concern coming out of high school because when Jeremiah Love was in high school, he played a lot of wide receiver. He caught a lot of passes, and I was like, oh, I don't know if he's going to be able to run through the hole and be the sort of downhill running back that Dylan McCullough wants, but he has absolutely proven that he can do that. It really started in the Ohio State game last season when he was one of the best running backs. I mean, a lot of Notre Dame's running backs were playing well in that game, but he really stood out in that one. He had a pretty solid game in the Sun Bowl, and then in the spring game, you just saw how physical he can be. He also ran over Adon Schuler in the Jersey scrimmage, so he's gotten a lot stronger, and he runs stronger as a result. So You add that into what is already a very versatile skill set. He can run through the hole. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's even training as a slot receiver. Plus, we all know he can make guys miss in the open field. Like, that is the type of electric back that you want to have. And even though I still think Jadarian Price is probably the better pure running back in terms of a guy who just like, you need 3 yards, you're going to give it to Jadarian Price, someone who can run through the tackles and make a play. Like, it's a good problem to have. It's a really good competition between the two, but I think that Love has elite traits that Jadarian Price doesn't possess in terms of Love's shiftiness, his acceleration, his burst, all of that. And I think that's what makes him the most exciting player with the ball in his hands. And I'm just really, really excited to see that combination between Price and Love this year because they're going to be so fun to watch. And I think there's going to be a lot of big plays this season from that tandem. Other options, I think you could have put Jaden Harrison, the wide receiver from Marshall. He ended up getting hurt, but he was a big topic of conversation early on because he is so fast. He's so shifty. He's like a true slot receiver, so he can't do all the things that Love can do, but he's an All-American kick returner. He's going to be the kick returner for Notre Dame, unfortunately. I think he had plantar fasciitis, so he wasn't able to finish out the spring, but he was another quality option. But still, all that being said, I'm taking Love as the most electric player. But I've got 2 more superlatives to hand out, including the biggest surprise from spring practice. Stay tuned. Today's episode is sponsored by Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much you can do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. You can make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. You can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. And you can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb that leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or Google Play. Today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And with great last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. I actually just used Gametime last week to go to a Dodgers game. It was terrific. I got in easily, and I bought my tickets in the car on the way there, and it ended up being a great night, all thanks to Gametime. It is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy, but my favorite thing about Gametime is the pricing shows your total cost up front, and you can buy tickets in a matter of seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, I've got 2 more superlatives to hand out, and this next one was pretty tricky. It's the biggest surprise, and I thought about a lot of different players, like, okay, which player really surprised me? Because there were some guys who, like, impressed a little bit more than I thought they would, but it's not really that big of a surprise, right? That Kingston Viliamu-Asa showed up and showed out. Like, he did a little bit more than I expected, but still, it's not a shock that he was able to do that. Going into the spring, I picked tight end Cooper Flanagan, just given the fact that Mitchell Evans was out. I thought, a lot of the attention is going to be on Eli Raridan, but keep an eye out for Cooper Flanagan. I thought that he would really step up his game in spring practice, and he still had a really good spring, but not quite enough to be the biggest surprise. So for me, it's freshman defensive young Bryce Young. And to be clear, it's not like I didn't think that Bryce Young would eventually be a really good player. It's just that I'm surprised at how quickly he's been able to adapt his game to the college level and perform in the way that he has. He capped off a really solid spring practice with a forced fumble on Jabron Payne, and Jabron Payne is a really reliable runner, and the fact that all it took was Young to just get his arm in there, force the ball out almost entirely on his own was a really, really impressive play. And I know it's been talked about a ton. I've already talked about it before on this podcast, but he just looks different out there. He looks like a basketball player, and he continues to bulk up. I think that Lauren Landau probably saw him, was like, oh my God, this guy is going to be like a Greek god when he's out of this program because he just has all these natural gifts. He's like 6'7". He has incredibly long arms. He's the son of a Hall of Famer. So there's so many great things going for Bryce Young. I just thought it would take a few years before he figured it out, but he's going to force his way onto the field this season. And that's despite the fact that Notre Dame has a veteran defensive line with 2 graduate seniors at both of the end positions. And then you've got another young guy like Boubacar Traore, who also is probably a good candidate for the superlative. He's ready to break out as well. And all that being said, Bryce Young is going to play, and he's going to deserve to be out there because he is just that good. And I actually remember doing a show when Bryce Young first committed, and it was exciting, right? You're getting the son of a legacy. You're getting a legacy to come to Notre Dame. His dad was a great player, NFL Hall of Famer, all of that stuff. So you're like, oh, cool. Notre Dame was able to get him at the time. I think he was like a 3-star prospect, sort of middle in the pack. And you're like, okay, he's got the size, he's got the pedigree. Maybe in a few years, he's going to be able to put it all together and be a quality college player. Then he skyrocketed up the recruiting ranks his senior year by having a fantastic senior season. He continued to grow. He continued to fill out. And now he continues on that insane upward trajectory in spring practice. Like you would think that, okay, he made a big jump, but he's going up against high schoolers. That's probably going to mellow out a little bit once he gets to college. Like it hasn't. And I still think he needs another year before he starts getting like a bunch of reps once Jordan Botelho and RJ Oben are gone. But he's going to play this year, and I don't think they're going to redshirt him. I think that they're going to use him, especially in obvious passing situations, because he can get after the quarterback, and it is just not something I ever would have expected when he committed. I thought he'd be a really good player eventually, but not this season, and he had a really, really good spring practice, and I think his rise has been meteoric, and it's crazy to think about just how good he can be if he's able to keep this up. It seems like a long shot, but he's been defying the odds really since the moment he committed, and that is why he is the biggest surprise of spring practice to me. Okay, last one, and this one was really tough. It's the most dominant. So I gave it to Howard Cross before the spring, and I thought, okay, Howard Cross is one of the top 5 players on the team. He plays defensive tackle. He's going to go up against a young, inexperienced offensive line every day in practice. He's probably going to dominate them. But I didn't really take into account the fact that Howard Cross and Riley Mills and Jack Heiser, like, they're not going to be as active participating in spring practice. Like, they're still going to practice. Now, Cross and Mills both missed a couple practices, I believe, because of academic commitments. Like, that happens sometimes in spring practice because guys don't schedule, or they schedule their semester a little bit differently in the spring because they don't have games every weekend and things like that. So I don't think Cross was available for every practice, and he wasn't really a factor in the blue and gold game because they don't need him to be, right? Like guys like Cross and Mills, they're proven commodities. They've been around for years. They have a ton of real game reps, the reps that matter the most. So spring practice is not nearly as valuable to them as it is for the young guys. So I can't give it to Howard. I can't give it to Mills. Xavier Watts has been really good this spring. I mean, he had the pick 6 in the Jersey scrimmage. He's going to have a great year this year for Notre Dame, but it's hard to be like truly dominant as a safety of Xavier Watts' size. Now, Kyle Hamilton, that's a different story, but he's an alien. He doesn't really count. So I'm looking at Benjamin Morrison, and I know he didn't really participate that long. If he didn't get hurt, I think he would have won this award easily. He made the best play of anyone in spring practice in the first practice of the entire session. He had that one-handed interception. He was all over. I believe it was Jaden Thomas. He came down with an interception, and it was reminiscent of Odell Beckham Jr., who made probably the greatest catch that's ever been made in a football game. It wasn't quite at that level, but it was close, man. It was really, really impressive, and you just watch that, and you're like, oh, yeah, this guy is really going to have one of the best seasons of any college football player in the country, and this is probably this is going to be his last year in a Notre Dame uniform. So I really don't have any other candidates who I could say they dominated throughout spring practice. There were definitely some players who had good days, really showed out, but if you're looking for the most dominant, I don't really think that anyone stood out. So I don't really know who to give it out to. I guess I'm going to have to give this award to Morrison. It does feel like a bit of a cop-out considering he probably only practiced for like a quarter of the spring before he had shoulder surgery that kept him out for the rest of spring practice and will likely keep him out for a significant portion of the summer. But I just don't really have any other guy to give it to. And I feel like I had to talk about it in some capacity since I did before the spring. And I think that Notre Dame certainly has several guys who are going to be dominant on the roster, but most of those guys are older, like Cross and Mills. And I just feel like in spring practice, there was no player who really stood out and dominated from practice 1 all the way through the blue and gold game. So I think really all we have to do now is just hope that Morrison gets healthy soon because he has a chance to dominate everyone who he faces this year and what will almost certainly be his last in a Notre Dame uniform before he ends up being a top pick in next year's NFL draft. So that is it for my spring practice superlatives. Let me know what you think, but that is going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Remember to subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and give us a follow on social media. The X account is at Locked On Irish. Instagram is at Locked On Irish Pod, and my personal X account is at Tyler, WOJCIAK. I'll see you guys tomorrow.